The Arctic Ocean on Christmas 1943 was a pitch-black, freezing void. For the sailors stationed there, the primary enemy wasn't a fleet, but the environment, a sub-zero storm that coated every inch of exposed steel in thick, heavy ice. Moving through that ice was the Scharnhorst. Armed with massive guns and wrapped in heavy steel, this German battleship was an apex predator, hunting the vulnerable Allied merchant ships struggling to carry supplies across the top of the world. Conter-Admiral Erich Bay commanded the vessel, and he understood his greatest advantage: speed. The Scharnhorst was built to strike from the shadows and outrun almost anything that tried to retaliate. Catching a target that could disappear back into a blizzard at 30 knots required more than simple pursuit. In these conditions, firepower alone would never be enough to bring the battleship to bay. Admiral Sir Bruce Fraser intended to solve that problem. As commander of the home fleet, he had one clear objective for the winter: find the Scharnhorst and eliminate it from the naval board. Fraser's plan was a two-part gamble. First, he deployed a vanguard of lighter, faster cruisers to scan the darkness, find the German ship, and harass it. While the cruisers flushed the target out, Fraser hid his heavy hitter in the darkness to the south, the HMS Duke of York. Boasting 10 14-inch guns, it was the only force capable of matching the German ship's armor. The strategy aimed to dictate the target's movement, denying the German captain the safety of the open sea and pushing him into a kill zone where the heavy guns were already waiting. The confrontation began in a blur of fire and ice. The British cruisers found their mark, and for several minutes, muzzle flashes were the only thing visible in the heavy snow. During the exchange, a lucky British shell struck the Scharnhorst's forward radar antenna. In the middle of an Arctic blizzard, the German battleship was suddenly blind. Admiral Bay fired his aft Caesar turret to keep the cruisers at a distance while he turned his ship south. He was banking on his engines to carry him clear of the engagement. He didn't know he was sailing directly toward Fraser. By fleeing the cruisers, Bay was unintentionally shortening the distance between himself and the Duke of York's heavy batteries. At this moment, the thickness of the Scharnhorst's armor became secondary to her lack of sensors. In modern naval combat, speed is a liability if you cannot see the obstacles in your path. While the Germans were blind, the Duke of York used active radar to maintain a perfect lock. Fraser stalked his prey, watching the blip move across the screen. He ordered his gunners to wait until the range closed to exactly 11,000 yards for maximum penetration. The British flagship unleashed its full broadside. The sudden concussion of the 14-inch guns shattered the storm's silence, catching the German crew completely off guard. One shell punched through the Anton turret, destroying it instantly. The damage was so severe, the Germans had to flood their second turret, Bruno, to prevent a magazine explosion that would have vaporized the ship. The ambush proved that radar had transformed the tactical landscape. A ship that could see its enemy in the dark held a decisive advantage over an opponent that relied on eyesight alone. Even with her forward guns silent, the Scharnhorst was still functional. Bay pushed his engines to their limit, turning east in a desperate attempt to use his 30-knot speed to escape the trap. But the British momentum stalled. A German shell struck the Duke of York, jarring the radar antenna out of its alignment. The British were now just as blind as the Germans. If they couldn't restore the radar immediately, their target would disappear into the Arctic mist. Lieutenant Harold Bates ignored safety protocols to climb the mast in the middle of the storm. He hauled himself up the freezing, ice-slicked struts while the blizzard threatened to rip him from the ship. Each time the Duke of York's main guns fired below, the shockwaves nearly threw Bates into the sea. He reached the array and physically forced the heavy antenna back into position. With the radar feed restored, the British calculated a final arcing firing solution. They launched a salvo at an extreme range of 22,000 yards, over 12 miles through the dark. The shell plunged through the Scharnhorst's upper deck and exploded in the boiler room. The hit slashed the ship's speed to just 8 knots, leaving her dead in the water. An entire fleet operation, involving thousands of men and millions of tons of steel, was saved by the physical endurance and single-minded determination of one man on a frozen mast. German engineers managed to patch the boilers and recover 22 knots, but by then the Scharnhorst was boxed in. Every direction of escape was blocked by British steel. Fraser ordered the final phase of the hunt. A swarm of British destroyers moved in, closing the distance to the burning battleship. Using their agility to dodge incoming fire, the destroyers closed to point-blank range and launched a coordinated torpedo attack from every angle of the compass. The Scharnhorst fired her secondary guns until the last shell was spent. After multiple torpedo hits, the ship capsized and disappeared beneath the waves of the Barents Sea. The outcome was the result of a layered tactical approach, using heavy battleships to cripple the target from a distance, while smaller ships delivered the final blow up close. The human cost was absolute. Of the 1,968 men aboard the Scharnhorst, only 36 were rescued from the freezing water. Admiral Bay did not survive the sinking. Following the victory, Admiral Fraser addressed his officers, speaking with respect about the German crew. He noted that they had defended their ship with a level of gallantry that earned the respect of the Royal Navy. The engagement at the North Cape effectively broke the Kriegsmarine's surface threat in the Arctic. It demonstrated that in the dark of the polar winter, the survival of a fleet no longer depended solely on its armor, but on the coordination of its sensors and the resilience of the men behind them.